humans are moving out of Africa and encountering the relic populations of Homo erectus that had previously emerged out of Africa. But the difference between anatomically modern humans and other hominin species that we've seen is that they become, about 100,000 years ago, through abstract thought and things like art, they become something different, something that we've never seen before. They start to use their imagination. They start to come to the coastline that Homo erectus had come to before and said, that is an ocean, I can't go any farther. Humans, we didn't stop there. Australia would have been an island and separated by a sea, and it would have been quite far and not visible to mainland, even 40,000 years ago or 50,000 years ago. But there is evidence that the Mungo Man, as it's called, and also the cow squamp show that humans were constructing boats and getting into the water and sailing off into where they had no idea where they were going. And the earliest place that humans went to farther than what their predecessors, the Homo erectus, had done, was Australia. So from at least 40,000 years ago, populations of humans moved and migrated to Australia. This is a previously uninhabited territory by any hominins, and they were the first to arrive there. And they brought with them certain characteristics that that were a subset of the larger population of humans, and so you saw some genetic drift take place. So larger brow ridge, larger eye orbit shape, separated from the main population, no longer had genetic gene flow, and the Australian population started to drift, and those characteristics that they brought with them were enhanced and replicated over tens of thousands of years. In the glacial periods, the polar ice caps, the glacial ice was trapping water in ice, and the sea levels were actually much lower at that time, which means that things that are now underwater were at that time land. And when you go up to the tip of Siberia, today Alaska comes and almost reaches Siberia, but there's a body of water that separates them. They don't touch, and that body of water is called the Bering Strait. But about 20,000 years ago or so, that would have been land. The sea level was lower, and the Bering Strait, actually, there was a landmass called Beringia that humans inhabited. And in fact, if you go up and you trawl your nets looking for crabs up in the Bering Strait today, frequently people come up with Paleolithic artifacts, bones, faunal remains, all sorts of things of land animals that are now underwater. They're under the Bering Strait, under the Bering Sea, I should say. I would not suggest trying to get from Alaska to Siberia today, because that's very rough water and it's very cold. But this would have been a lush, very green, swampy area with lots of animals, an attraction for humans in the late Pleistocene. And so humans went up to the northern parts of Siberia and inhabited this landmass, Beringia, and followed animals that didn't really realize that they didn't care whether they were going into North America, and you had a crossover where you had animals going freely between Asia and North America and coming down into North America by what's called an ice-free corridor through the sort of center of North America. There's also likelihood that people were following the coastline and going all the way down into South America following that coastline as well. At least by about 15,000 years ago, we know that humans were coming across to the Americas. And after the Ice Age started to to end, the sea levels rose, and now you got the what was once a land bridge connecting Asia and America that started to separate, and you now have a body of water, the Bering Strait. So all the people that were in North America that had followed herds of animals across, they became trapped. And so just like in Australia, you had genetic drift, that it was a subset of people that were living in Beringia that then became trapped over in North America, and the Asian, African, and Australian and European populations were able to, well, not the Australian, but the old world populations still had gene flow, but genetic drift started to take place, and you have this borne out in the genetic information that we have from Native American populations, is that they share similarities with groups of people that lived in Asia, but they have concentrated some of these features. Things like type O blood is very common in North and South America and very uncommon elsewhere in the world. The earliest evidence that we have for, or one of the earliest evidence we have for Native Americans' bones is in a Kennewick man. And this is about 9,300 years old, and it has a large, robust skull with large attachments for chewing muscles. And this probably reflects dietary differences between Paleo-Indians and their descendants. And so we have some strong evidence for some of the early people to come across from North and South America. And the tools that they brought were actually specially adapted for hunting these megafauna over here. Things like woolly mammoth and mastodons and the Clovis points. And right here in Nevada, we have the so-called Western stem tradition, which is a similar type of a spear point for hunting big game, going back to about 15,000 years ago. These they arrived in North America, and they immediately started adapting to the climate, the flora, the fauna, and setting up their lives here. They then became cut off and from the old world, and you didn't have any contact with the old with their forebears until the European colonization. So. There's a slide on the slideshow that is on Canvas that you can see that shows the sort of sequence. I talked a little bit about how humans emerged in Africa and went to Asia and then to Europe, but we went farther than that. And that's where we're using our brains in a different way. That it's not just that we have big brains, but that we use them to imagine what's beyond the horizon. So, humans first went to Australia and then to North and South America. And then started to even go into places that were so far out into the sea that how would you even know that there's anything there? It blows my mind to think of the bravery, the courage, the imagination, the guts that it would have taken to spread into some of these places, especially like Polynesia. And so by about 6,000 years ago, people go to Taiwan, 5,000 years ago to Philippines, 3,500 to the Marianas, 3,200 years ago to Papua New Guinea and Melanesia, 3,000 years ago to Micronesia, things like Solomon Islands and Fiji, 2,000 years ago, Melanesia, the Marshall Islands, and from about 1,300 years ago to Polynesia, places like Hawaii. And one of the last places actually to be settled by humans was coming back around from Polynesia to New Zealand. And that was one of the last places that humans migrated to. But as I said, we weren't finished there. We now have people living on space stations, and we have people in Antarctica, and we've had people go to the bottom of the ocean, and we're going to have somebody on a distant planet. And this is the behavioral modernity. It's not just the size of brain, it's what you do with the brain that becomes important to our survival and why we are doing things different than any other animal. And so that's what we're going to come back to next chapter when we start to look at domestication and sedentism, that we start to behave differently, and that changes everything. It's quite possibly the most important thing to happen to humans in modern Homo sapiens history. Okay, I'll see you then.